Mhm. Da-da, da-da, da-da. Man, it's chilly today. I don't like it when it's cold like this.
I think it's great.
Ew.
Go outside, so I don't care.
Go move up north. Cold liking person.
I used to live in the north.
I know. I remember. But then again, my goal is to be in Florida one day. So I was talking to someone yesterday. They also want to move down to Florida, but they were like, no one really likes 110 degrees with like 100% humidity. And I was just like, me? They were like, no, you don't. I said, yeah, actually I do, because that means I can go swimming. I can go do water activities, which are like my favorite thing in the world. And they were like, oh, okay, well, maybe that does make sense. That I have no problem with humidity. Like, I don't mind walking outside and just having like this heavy air that I'm breathing in. It's like,
You're just an actual alligator.
yeah, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. It's glorious. I hate cold weather. Because I'm an alligator in cold weather too. I just like kind of freeze up. I'm like, I don't want to move. Conserve all energy. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Let's see, we have 9 participants. Almost everyone says, nah, I don't want to see your face. You can't see my face. It's all right. All right, so we're talking about industrialization. Hopefully you guys watched yesterday's video, or at least watched something on Unit 5, because this is Unit 6. We'll do Unit 7 on Monday. Make sure everyone is squared away for the actual test. We want to make sure that you do all the checklists that they have for you. And let me encourage you, review. I mean, you think about it, come next Wednesday, you're done with AP Euro. Like, there's not going to be anything else that you have to do. That's it. Like, class is done. You might come in for a Zoom or something afterwards just to kind of hash out how everything went, but that'll be about it. So you're almost there, almost done.
We can start a Zoom and collectively scream into the void.
Yes.
That's perfectly fine. Don't if I mute you, don't worry about it. You just keep screaming. We'll see the anguish on your face, the open mouth. We'll see everything, and we'll understand. Don't worry.
Like the Scream painting.
Absolutely. And you guys can tell me what the question is, because I have no idea what it is. They don't enlighten us. Understandably so, because I could definitely see some teachers like, okay, everyone, let's prepare. Look at that. I had 100% of my class pass. Never mind. We'll move on from there. All right. So we're going to talk about the Industrial Revolution today. We're going to look at also how the revolutions of 1848 come about, how those are going to affect everything, and then really the Second Industrial Revolution, how that's going to change everything. Remember, where does the Industrial Revolution take root first?
England?
Where?
England, right?
Yeah, it takes place in England. Now, we also talked that it also had a strong effect in the Netherlands, but England is where it all begins. And remember, there's 2 things that lead England to being able to become that, I guess, bright light of the Industrial Revolution, and that's the Scientific Revolution and the Enlightenment movement. Remember, they were one of the first countries to start the Royal Academies of Learning, really, as science and various other things. And so they were the ones to pursue education on a greater scale and pushing the boundaries of science and just knowledge in general. And also remember, England gave a monetary gift to anyone who invented anything new. And so that's encouraging people like, hey, I can actually get paid for something that I do. And so they're pretty excited about all of that at that time. And so those prizes will go a long way. And another thing that you need to understand is Britain has spread themselves out so far in the world. Remember, it was said that the sun did not set on the British Empire, which was very true. But they had spread themselves out so far that they had access to large amounts of raw materials, despite themselves being a island nation. They had access to all of these raw materials. And remember, Britain was pretty good at taking raw materials and producing something of quality. And so they would bring in the raw materials and then they would produce well-made goods. Everyone bought it. And so England was doing very well in all of this. And it also didn't hurt England. If you can visualize a map of England with me real quick, there's a lot of rivers that flow through the country. At any point on the island, you're never more than 20 miles away from navigable water. So you're able to get any sort of good that you make. It's very cheap to get it to any sort of store or market that's going on. And so all of this kind of helps England out. And then last but not least, the agricultural revolution. Remember, England and the Netherlands kind of led the way in all this, and their production of food makes all of this possible. So you're able to support a larger population. And also what that does is it causes food to be cheaper, which gives people more, anyone?
Money.
Yeah, you get more money, and what do you do with it? Probably go. What do you do with more money?
Buy luxury goods.
Yes, and luxury goods include your furniture, china, all those kinds of things that you don't technically need. And now you've got this middle class rising up who are spending money on all of these goods that England is able to produce. So it's not just England that's producing it. Wow, Aaron's in the wrong thing.
Oh,
Hey, Aaron.
Hello.
We're meeting at 11:45 for Bible, buddy. Just so you know.
Oh, okay. Oops.
I mean, you
Right,
can
see.
hang around, but
I mean,
it won't be anything to
I'm
do with
fine.
you. All right. And so industry begins. Does anyone remember what the most important invention at the beginning of this revolution was? Like, it changed everything.
The steam engine.
Very good. The steam engine. Now, originally, you guys know what the steam engine was used for? Did I talk about that in class? I know we talked about the advancement of the steam engine and how that really afforded industry to move forward, but originally it was started for coal mining. And what they had, because remember, England is a very wet, rainy island. And if you're going to dig for coal, what are you going to run into?
Water.
Lots and lots of water. So the first engine that was made, the first steam engine that was made, was built to pump that water out. And in fact, it was James Watt who actually made it even better. One time he was called out to work on one that had broken, and he saw that if they added just a different part to it, that all of a sudden it would begin to work even more efficiently and better. And so the coal burning steam engine was absolutely important. Do you guys remember what pushed England to pursuing a coal burning engine versus a wood burning engine?
The fact that they have a ton of coal.
That is true, but they were also running out of
Trees.
they're running out of trees. They'd already cut down a whole lot, and so they didn't have a whole lot left, and so that kind of forced them to look other places in order to get this energy. And so with the steam engine, they're able to produce more iron than ever before. And remember, iron in the first part of the Industrial Revolution is extremely important. It helps you build better buildings, better products, and everything else. And so all of that's going to come into play with that steam engine. And if you remember, we also talked about the Great Exhibition, the Crystal Palace. Remember that huge place that basically looked like a modern day mall, and it was made entirely out of glass and iron. It was a modern marvel. Millions and millions of people would come to this place to see the market, to be able to purchase things, and really just kind of say that they were there. It was like the place to be. If I remember correctly, it was like 1850 or somewhere in there that the Great Exhibition was open in the Crystal Palace. And so it literally just looked like a modern day mall. Also railroads, with the introduction of iron, railroads change everything, because now it's cheaper to ship stuff over land and much faster, because before you put it on a cart, a horse, and that could take time and days. With a railroad, you could get it there relatively quickly. And so the Industrial Revolution, as it takes root in England, begins to spread throughout Europe. France and Germany are probably the two most unique places that followed after, because they don't exactly follow the same road. France, instead of it being a laissez-faire led by like businessmen and by the private citizens, it becomes led by the government. And so the government kind of pursues it. And because they had fewer or less access to the raw materials that England did, their industrial cities were much smaller. And so what that does is it actually avoids a lot of the problems that we talk about, and we'll talk about in just a minute, that Britain faced in the massive growth of their city. So if you look at like Manchester, you look at Liverpool, you look at all of these different areas that become industrial centers in England, remember they have a lot of issues, socially speaking. And so France kind of escaped a lot of those issues because they had smaller industrialized areas due to the lack of resources that they had. In Germany, if you remember, Zollverein, does that term mean anything? Remember, those were, what were those? They're workers' unions.
Okay, I had that down. I
just wasn't sure, and I didn't want to put myself out there. So you have the workers' unions, and the worker unions rise up, and they essentially by 1850 they're successful in running the whole thing, the whole Industrial Revolution. By 1834, because Prussia had huge amounts of iron and coal deposits, they were able to get the unions in there. By 1850, I believe they were mining over 6 million tons of coal a year. If that gives you any idea how much coal Germany had. But one thing you need to make sure that you understand is at this point, Germany is not unified. So Prussia is the one who has all these coal reserves, and the rest of Germany, not so much. And so now remember, the Industrial Revolution took place in which part of Europe? Remember, Europe is broken down into two parts from this point forward. Yeah,
Western Europe.
Western Europe is the one who's experiencing all the great things. Eastern Europe, not so much. Eastern Europe is going backwards. They're going into serfdom more than going out of it. Spain was relatively unchanged. They really didn't experience much of the Industrial Revolution. They were very, they stayed agrarian, rural. Also, they stayed very much into like fishing markets and that kind of thing. Russia would rely on serfdom more than ever. They didn't go forward too much. In fact, the only great thing they did throughout either parts of the Industrial Revolution is they put down the Trans-Siberian Railroad that took them to from one side, I think it was Moscow, the capital, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So that was probably their greatest development throughout that time period. But Russia kind of went backwards, and most of Eastern Europe was either stuck or moving backwards. Remember, the rest of Eastern Europe, why didn't the Industrial Revolution have a large effect on them? It's because they lacked something. It was access to one thing. Remember, there was a few things that made this possible for England, and it was very important.
Access to water.
Not necessarily access to water, it's food.
Okay.
They had not had an agricultural revolution. They had not learned, the value of farming and the different techniques and changing things up. And so their food was not as easily accessible. And so whenever you have lack of food, that means that your Industrial Revolution is extremely slow in getting off the ground. And so that will be a huge problem for them. Now, the Second Industrial Revolution, what product drove the Second Industrial Revolution? They found a better way to do this, and it was actually cheaper.
Cotton.
Anything that had done before. Not iron. What you can take iron and make.
She said
Steel.
Oh, steel. What now?
Never mind.
Okay. Steel. Very good. So they've come up with a steel making process. What is that called? Anybody remember? Guy by the name of Henry Bessemer.
Yeah.
He came up with the Bessemer process. Now, it is, I don't think it's important to know, but I mean, for the people who like random facts like Naaman, this is not the first time they'd invented steel. In fact, the Chinese had done it all the way back in the 11th century, but they were unable to do it on a large scale. So the production of steel was extremely expensive and not cost effective. So Henry Bessemer comes along and is able to take the steam engine and able to make a process in which you can create tons of steel all at once, which means that steel is worth the cost that it's gonna take to actually make and everything else. And so it becomes the driving force of the second half of the Industrial Revolution, or the second wave of the Industrial Revolution. And so you begin to see steel push forward. And remember, steel is even better than iron, so the buildings that they're making are more sturdy and everything else that's going on. And also remember, the Great Fire of London takes place around this time period, and so London's able to completely rebuild everything with steel versus iron or wood and brick and everything else. And so the invention of steel will go a long way to helping cities and everything else. Electricity is going to be pursued during this time period. Also, gasoline engines will be pursued during this time period. Obviously, we won't see either one of those used in great quantities until much later. But the second wave of the Industrial Revolution, you begin to see the pursuit of better technology and better energy production than what coal can give you. Because coal is great, but remember, what does it do in a city? What happens to the air in a city?
Smog.
Constantly, yes, producing coal. Remember, the windows would be completely fogged over. Lungs, not great to constantly breathe that smoke in. And so you begin to see a change, and oil becomes something that becomes a commodity during that time period. Now, remember, let's talk about the social stuff of the Industrial Revolution. How were the workers treated?
Not
Poorly.
Oh, yeah. What was their working day like? You remember how many hours?
It was something like 10 to 20 hours a day.
18
And-
hours was roughly normal. Would be your probably median. Sometimes they would even work like into the next day. So you'd actually work longer than that if the boss wanted you to. So working conditions were very bad. There was poor lighting in these factories. I mean, you imagine an 18-hour workday. Do you think at any given point it's going to be dark outside?
Well, yeah.
Absolutely. Now imagine being in a factory, and what source of light do you have in a factory whenever it gets dark outside?
Candles.
Yeah, it's not going to be great. So poor lighting is not going to be good, especially if a piece of machinery breaks and you have to put your hand in there to fix it. And
Lots of lost limbs and fingers.
absolutely. Also, remember, women were paid much less than men during this time period. And so the bosses preferred to hire women because they could pay them less. They also preferred children because they had tiny hands and they could reach into these small areas between the machines, which was completely safe, as we all know. The people would get sick from the conditions. Children would actually develop like spinal conditions where they had to bend over for such long periods of time. They actually developed spine conditions that would affect them for the rest of their life. And also remember, all these people moving to the city for factory jobs, and the housing market is not exactly equipped to deal with all this. So they're going to deal with dysentery, cholera. They're also going to have sewage problems. I mean, you know, how you get rid of all the human waste that comes
You dump
out
it in the Thames.
Yeah. Well, they'll do that for a while, and then one day it's going to stop them from meeting because it smells so bad whenever the Thames kind of dries up and it all just sits there and the heat bakes it. Then Parliament goes, we must do something about this. This is not
Thames still smells really bad, but it's mostly a fishy smell now.
well, hopefully one day I'll get over there and I can experience that for myself. But still,
But don't you hate the cold?
I do, but I love England, so I can take it. Like, I don't mind visiting the cold. I hate living in the cold. Like
Mm.
if I lived in Florida and I want to go skiing one day, sure, I'll go skiing for a day and then I'll go home and I'll be warm again. I'm fine with that. Some social problems that they're going to have to deal with besides, the health issues. You're going to deal with alcoholism. Lack of jobs are going to lead people to alcoholism. Prostitution, again, lack of jobs. You're going to earn money one way or another. Crime will be a problem. And then, of course, we already mentioned sanitation will be a problem. Now, you do see the rise of the middle class through all of this because, well, there's more money to be had. And so there's not all negative effects at that point, socially speaking, but for the most part, if you were a woman or a child, things were pretty poor. And there will be a lot of rallies and everything, people trying to help you out, to help your conditions. Various people will rise up to help with all that. Now, talk about, the revolts of 1848. Remember, after 1815, you have Napoleon and you have a guy by the name of Metternich come onto the stage, and he believes that all the problems prior to this were started by liberals. And so Europe turns extremely conservative. And when I say conservative, I don't mean like what we talk about conservative and liberal today. I mean so conservative that he believed that if government did nothing, you could never have another Napoleon. And so a lot of Europe kind of follows behind this in the concert of Europe. And he promotes this idea that, get government to do as little as possible and the people will be happy and all will be well. Problem is whenever this takes place, it's only the rich who do well whenever there's no change whatsoever. And so this is going to be one of the big things that's going to lead you to your revolutions of 1848. Governments will be stagnant. They will do next to nothing. And then you have the poorer people who, when things go bad, they revolt. We're going to look at a few of those today, just to kind of remind you of some. Remember France, 1840s. They have a few revolts here and there. Nothing major, nothing that's considered a revolution. Louis Philippe is in control, and he kind of takes to Metternich's plan, and he does nothing. Literally, the most complacent government you could probably ever see. Does nothing, sits there. And then what happens is the peasants are upset because nothing is changing for them. Nothing's getting better. And then guess what comes along? Crop failures. France has probably the worst luck with growing food that I've seen in history. It happens at the worst times. Like, it doesn't happen in a prosperous time where everyone's like happy. When the crop failure comes, everyone's upset and it's like, it's time to revolt. The moment the French people get hungry, they revolt. And so they get all upset. They revolt, and Louis Philippe abdicates, and you literally have the creation of the Second Republic. And the only way you have a Second Republic is if you have a brand new constitution. And so in less than 100 years, France has a brand new, really almost less than 50 years. It's like 60 years, I believe. They have a brand new constitution, and they start France's Second Republic, and they give the right to vote to every adult male. Before it was if you owned land. Now it's every adult male has the right to vote in France. And all is well until a little bit after the Second Republic starts, you have more people upset at the amount of unemployment. And the amount of unemployment is a problem. And so they start what's known as like government workshops, which literally turned into, there's so many people that joined it. They gave you a shovel, told you to dig a ditch, and then they told you to fill it back in, and you worked for today. That's awesome. And you got paid next to nothing for that. So it was almost better to be unemployed than working hard to do nothing, to accomplish nothing. And so you have these work programs that were not well received, if you will. And it leads to the June Days. Now, if you know anything about the June Days, not a good experience at all. It was a very violent uprising in Paris. And you're going to end up with 10,000 people killed during these 3 days that take place. And they basically start an elective leadership. And guess who they elect to be the first leader after all of this settles down? It's got a famous connection in the past.
Are you talking about Napoleon III?
Yeah, Louis Napoleon III. Yeah, he's elected first. You know, the French people have a infatuation with anyone related to Napoleon, apparently, at this point in history. And so he becomes the elected official and will move forward from there. Austria, things go a lot differently. France actually had, I guess you could say, besides 10,000 people dying in the streets, a successful revolution. The government was changed, the laws were changed, all was well. Austria, not so much. Austria is very strong in their response. They put down their rebellion, and not only do they put down their rebellion, but they also go and help Hungary put down their rebellion. They help the Czechs put down their rebellion, with Russia's help, mind you. And they kind of restore stability to that area of Europe, to basically what we're looking at is Eastern Europe there. So the Austrians had a much firmer grip on everything, and they basically said, no, you will not revolt, you will not get your way, and we are going to move on with our lives. Prussia, on the other hand, was a lot different. Prussia was actually successful. Well, I shouldn't say Prussia, Germany in general, but Prussia, they were very successful. They were able to revolt, uprise, and say, we won. So they said, okay, you know what? We're going to call the Frankfurt Assembly. And you're going to propose all your changes, and we're going to accept them. While the Frankfurt Assembly was going on, though, the monarchy was able to regain control of Berlin and stomp out all the protesters. And then when the Frankfurt Assembly came back with all their changes, the monarchy just said, nah, we're good. We reestablished our control. Everything that you say is null and void. And so they refused to accept what they had been working on that whole time. So Prussia was unique in its response to everything. And yeah, sure, you guys go plan everything out. We're just going to regain control and then basically tell you that you wasted your time in Frankfurt. And so you see varying responses. Italy tried to gain their independence during this time, and if you remember correctly, they were unsuccessful. Italy and Germany will not be completely unified until the later 1800s, 1870s, if I remember correctly. So there will be a bunch of revolutions throughout Europe, and a lot of it's driven by this conservative attitude of do nothing. If we're liberal and we push for change, then what happens is you have these uprisings and you have the chance to have a Napoleon come out of nowhere who tries to conquer the world. So keep everything status quo. We'll do as little as we possibly can. All right. That's basically Unit 6 in a nutshell. All of it, the industrialization. Any questions? Does it make sense?
Sure.
Sure. All right, so we'll do Unit 7 on Monday, and we'll also make sure that you guys have everything you need. For those of you that are here now, make sure, I'm going to put a link in there, AP 2020 checklist. Go ahead and get that done as much as you can. There's some stuff that they want you to do next week. Something with the lockdown browser. They're doing something different. They want to check it to make sure it's working for you before the test date next Wednesday. So make sure that you're ready for all of that. Otherwise, if you don't have any questions, we'll see you later. In about 15 minutes for some of you.
Yeah, in about 15 minutes.
All right, guys.